Hey guys, happy Thursday. Today is day 4 of your learning packet. And like I mentioned yesterday, it's one of the heaviest writing days of your learning packet. But if you're following along with me in these videos, you're gonna get it knocked out. The goal for today is that you end up with 3 body paragraphs. And this is the part where we're gonna kind of move away a little bit from the setup of the learning packet, because we're gonna use some of the resources and graphic organizers that we had used to write our argumentative essay to write this informative one. But as long as you have all the parts when you turn it in, you'll be fine and you'll get all the credit for it, okay? So today for the reading portion, once again, you are doing your independent reading. You could use Epic, a library book, or just go online and find an article that you're interested in. But then if you look at the reading part, it also says, read the excerpt from chapter 1 of the book, Brian's Return by Gary Paulsen. So I'm gonna go ahead and read that. We're gonna start with the reading portion because it also asks you to answer some questions in the writing part. So let's make it our first goal to knock out the reading and answer the questions about Brian's return, and then we'll get into the explanatory writing. All right, so here's the story that they want us to read by Gary Paulsen. It's called Brian's Return. And if you've looked in the distance learning packet, there's some questions that you need to answer after you have read the story. So I always like to cheat a little bit and just kind of go over and take a look at what are the questions that we have to answer when we finish. The first question says, describe Brian's emotional state in this excerpt. Use specific words and phrases in the text that indicate how he may be feeling. And then for number 2, it says, choose at least 3 details that evoke the use of the 5 senses and write them down. Analyze the significance of Brian using all 5 senses during his experience of returning to the wilderness, okay? So we're looking for the answers about 5 senses, and then basically how he's doing emotionally and how he's feeling, okay? So we can kind of already make some predictions on what this is gonna be about just based off of that. So let's take a look and start the story. While I'm reading, I'm just gonna highlight maybe some sensory details that I might see or anything that talks about how he's feeling. So Brian sat quietly, taken by a peace he had not known for a long time, and let the canoe drift forward along the lily pads. To his right was the shoreline of a small lake he had flown into an hour earlier. Around him was the lake itself, an almost circular body of water of approximately 80 acres surrounded by northern forest, pine, spruce, poplar, birch, and thick brush. That right there, he's telling us what he sees. So he's describing his surroundings. Kind of sounds like he's in somewhere really peaceful. It was late spring, June 3rd to be exact, and the lake was teeming, crawling, buzzing, and flying with life. Mosquitoes and flies filled the air, swarming on him, and he smiled now, remembering his first horror at the small blood drinkers. In the middle of the canoe, he had an old coffee can with some kindling inside it and a bit of birch bark, and he lit them and dropped a handful of green poplar leaves on the tiny fire. Soon smoke billowed out and drifted back and forth across the canoe, and the insects left him. He had repellent with him this time, along with nearly 200 pounds of other gear, but he hated the smell of it and found it didn't work as much as a touch of smoke now and then. The black flies and deer flies and horse flies ignored repellent completely. He swore they seemed to lick it off, but they hated the smoke and stayed well off the canoe. The relief gave him time to see the rest of the activity on the lake. He remained still, watching and listening. So I think he's by himself, clearly. He's in a canoe on a lake, and let's kind of just think about how he might be feeling. It sounds like it might be peaceful since he's on a lake by himself. Maybe he was a little bit annoyed by the bugs at the beginning, but as he kind of makes his way through, I don't know, if I was on a lake, I'd be unpeaceful. So I'm gonna put annoyed right here because of bugs. And then I'm just gonna put peaceful and then a question mark. He does a really, really good job of describing what he sees, but I haven't seen too much smell, taste, or anything, okay? To his left, he heard a beaver slap the water with its tail and dive, a warning at the intruder at the strange smoking log holding the person. Oh, so we've got sound here. Brian smiled. He had come to know beaver for what they truly were, engineers, family-oriented home builders. He'd read that most of the cities in Europe were founded by beaver, that beaver had first felled the trees along the rivers and dammed them up. The rising water killed more trees, and when the food was gone and the beaver had no more bark to chew, they left. The dams eventually broke apart and the water drained and left large clearings along the rivers where the beaver had cut down all the trees. Early man came along and started the cities where the clearings lay. Cities like London and Paris were founded and settled first by beaver. This is kind of a random little paragraph where he starts talking about beavers. Let's see if this leads anywhere. In front and to the right, he heard the heavier footsteps of a deer moving through the hazel brush. Probably a buck, because he heard no smaller footsteps of a fawn. A buck with its antlers in velvet, more than likely moving away from the smell of smoke from the canoe. So we've got more sound. He describes probably what the antlers might feel like velvet. And so he's kind of just listening to the world around him. So listening to world around him. Okay, let's go ahead and go to the next page. Don't worry, there's only 3. A frog jumped from a lily pad 6 feet away and had barely entered the water when a northern pike took it with a slashing strike, and that tore the surface of the lake and flipped lily pads over to show their pale undersides. Somewhere a hawk screamed, and he looked for it, but could not see it through the leaves of the trees around the lake. It would be hunting, bringing home mice for a nest full of young, looking for something to kill. No, Brian thought, not in that way. The hawk did not hunt to kill, it hunted to eat. Of course it had to kill to eat, along with all other carnivorous animals. But the killing was the means to bring food, not the end. Only man hunted for sport or for trophies. So once again, he says sound. He saw the pale underside, the pads. But then we have this moment here where he talks about only man hunted for sport. And so he's kind of like thinking of people and humans in a really negative way. So I'm going to highlight that. It is the same as with me as with the hawk, Brian felt. He turned the paddle edgeways, put a little question mark right here, eased forward silently and pulled back with an even stroke. I will kill to eat or to defend myself, but for no other reason. So he doesn't like to hurt people. It doesn't kill. In the past 2 years, except for the time with Derek on the river in a kind of lonely agony, he had tried to find things to read or watch that brought the woods to him. He missed the forest, the lakes, the wild, as he thought of it, so much that at times he could not bear it. The guns and hunting magazines, the hunting and fishing videos on television sickened him. Men used high-velocity weapons to shoot deer or elk from so far away they could barely see them, or worse, blasting them from a blind or the back of a jeep, baiting bear with bits full of rotten meat and shooting them with rifles that could stop a car, taking bass for sport or money in huge contests with fancy boats and electric gear that located each fish individually. So he doesn't like to hurt animals. Okay, so against hunting and fishing. Sport, they called it, but they weren't hunting or fishing because they needed to. They were killing to kill, not to eat, to prove some kind of worth. And he stopped reading the magazines and watching the videos. His survival in the wilderness had made him famous in a small way, and some of the magazines interviewed him, as did some of the hunting and sporting shows on television, but they all got it wrong, completely wrong. So apparently he's somebody who's very famous for surviving in the wilderness. So famous for his survival skills. And then I kind of want to talk about how do we think he's feeling. And this part here, the way he describes hunting and how people do it, he kind of seems to be really angry. So angry with hunters. Okay, so let's go ahead and go to the back side, our last chapter, our last section here. It says, boy conquers savage wilderness, the magazine said in the blurbs on the covers, learns to beat nature. It wasn't that way, had never been that way. Brian hadn't conquered anything. Nature had whipped him, not the other way around, had beaten him down and pounded the stupidity out of his brain until he had been forced to bend, forced to give, forced to learn to survive. He had learned the most important fact of all, and the one is that is so hard for many to understand or believe. Man proposes, nature disposes. He hadn't conquered nature at all. He had become a part of it, and it had become a part of him, maybe all of him. And that, he thought, as the canoe slid gently forward, had been exactly the problem. So he kind of like says that like nature is in charge at this point, you know, that man doesn't have a choice. Kind of like really interesting, because I like the way the story started with how calm it was on the water. And then it turns into like, rawr, like people are bad, you know, Brian's here to respect it. It's a really cute story. And so I kind of want to highlight this last part right here. He hadn't conquered nature at all. He had become a part of it, and it had become a part of him, maybe all of him. Okay. All right, so now let's take a look at the questions. And if you take a look, you'll notice that I included some sentence frames to help you answer the questions. So if we look at question 1, it says, describe Brian's emotional state in this excerpt. Use specific words and phrases in the text that indicates how he may be feeling. So we're going to start with words that describe Brian's emotional state are. So you're going to list some words and phrases, and I would probably focus on the last part of the story, because remember, we talked about how he went from being very calm and relaxed to he shifted to kind of just being very angry with the world. And you can look for words that he uses, because he uses words like kill, trophy, like those are words that like have this like intense angry feeling, because instead of kill, he could have said they died quietly or they passed away. That's a softer way of saying it, but instead he says kill, and it seems way more intense and angrier when he uses that word. So you're going to come up with a few words and phrases from the story that will describe how he's feeling. And then for question number 2, it says choose at least 3 details that evoke the use of the 5 senses and write them down. Analyze the significance of Brian using all 5 senses during his experience of returning to the wilderness. So once again, I have a frame for you. So I have 3 details that evoke the 5 senses are. So go back into the story and look for phrases that show the 5 senses. So it could be any one of them, like taste, touch, smell. You're going to write the little phrase in quotes right here, because you need to have 3 of them. And then the second part of the question, it says Brian uses the 5 senses during his experience because, so then tell me why he used these 5 senses. You want to focus on what did he create and how did he make the reader feel by using these 5 senses, okay? And I kind of want to push you in the direction of like, why do we use sensory details to describe our writing? All right, so now that we have finished Brian's return, we're going to go into the explanatory writing. And on here, it says, reread the explanatory article writing prompt from day 1. Write the rough draft of your explanatory article. So this is going to be an essay. It's going to be 5 paragraphs, but here's what's going to happen. We're only going to write 3 today, and we're going to write the 3 body paragraphs. And we're coming back to using this graphic organizer, okay? So I want to remind you that we have completed parts of this graphic organizer. And if you haven't already guessed it, what we're doing next is evidence-based writing. When we had done the argumentative essay, we had talked about how each column counted as a paragraph. So this is where we're now going to jump over, and we're going to end up with another piece of paper, and we're going to set ourselves up for evidence-based writing. Okay, and now I'm going to walk you through how to do evidence-based writing for each section. Okay, I'm not doing the work for you, I'm just walking you through how to do it. All right, so what we have here is a completed evidence-based writing for paragraph number 1. And so that's for subtopic number 1, and that's this one right here, okay? So just like with evidence-based writing, our evidence goes here, our explanation and elaboration go here, and then we have our spot for a transition sentence. So let's take a look at this first one. So I copied what I had written in my first circle, and I put invasive plants impact natural features. Then I went into the sources and I looked for a quote that talked about how they can impact natural features. And I put, according to the text, some non-native plants can provide large amounts of food affecting the eating habits and behaviors of animals. So remember, this one had to do with the Yosemite article. And then under explanation, I'm answering the who, what, why. I put, in other words, invasive plants serve as food to attract and change animal behaviors. And then for my elaboration, I put, for example, bears can move to an area to eat that they usually don't visit and encounter people. And then I gave you my transition sentence. I put, although invasive plants affect natural features, also they can spread their seeds easily. So I will upload and attach this to Google Classroom so you can see the whole thing. Remember, what you're gonna need to do though, is you are gonna be responsible for doing paragraph number 2 and paragraph number 3 for evidence-based writing. So you can always just set yourself up on the back side of your paper and then maybe grab one more to do number 3. You do not have to write this out on your rough draft in your distance learning log, okay? This is your rough draft. You're just writing 3 paragraphs because tomorrow I'm gonna give you the frames for your introduction and your conclusion, okay? So once again, this is your first one. You are responsible for doing these 2 on your own. So these are the next 2, okay? So once again, this thinking map is all in Google Classroom, and then I will upload this one too to Google Classroom as well. Okay, so now you should have ended up with 3 evidence-based writing paragraphs. So you have 2 options. You could either drop the writing into the graphic organizer so you don't end up with all these papers that you're probably going to end up losing, or you could just attach those 3 paragraphs and just kind of slip them into that part of your distance learning packet, because that's your rough draft, okay? I don't want you to have to rewrite multiple times, because for day 5, you're actually going to have to write your final draft, okay? But for day 5, I'm also going to provide you with a sentence frame for your introduction paragraph and a huge frame also for your concluding paragraph, okay? And then chances are I'm probably going to help you fill it out and get that part done as well, okay? So don't freak out. I'm here to help, and it's going to get done.